Tell me if this sounds familiar. You need to talk to someone in IT, anyone in IT. It could be your web developer, it could be your hosting company, it could be your 14-year-old niece because you have a pressing concern. It could be about the speed of the site, it could be related to security or even best practice, but you can't find the words. You don't know where to start, and it's embarrassing. Your typically left-brain tech advisor starts talking and it gets worse. Suddenly it begins to feel like you're at school again. You're being schooled when all you wanted was a simple answer. This is a challenge that faces business builders every day, from startups to CEOs. Well, today I have some good news. To help me lift the veil in this terribly confusing area of commerce, I have the Asia Pacific CTO of computer hosting and cloud behemoth Rackspace, Alan Perkins, to help me simplify the 5 big trends affecting business owners just like you in the world of computing, so you'll never be forced to endure a one-sided tech conversation ever again. Now get this, Alan was one of the first CIOs to globally take a computer into the cloud. He was listed by Rupert Murdoch's favourite newspaper as one of the top people to watch in technology, and he composes orchestral music. Thanks for joining me, Alan.
You're welcome. Happy to be here, James.
Now we're going to talk about 5 big trends that are affecting the computing space and anyone in business, so that when business owners from startups to CEOs are talking to technology professionals, they're talking about things using the same type of language. What advice, very quickly, do you have to anyone who finds themselves in that position where they are talking a different language?
Well, I think the first thing is you need to get down to the syntax of what you're actually trying to achieve as a business. I think we focus too much on the technology and not on what we're trying to achieve with it.
That's really interesting, because one of the first trends we're going to talk about today, and we've got 5 trends, is a very complex word that I have trouble saying. Speaking of technology jargon, disintermediation.
Yeah, disintermediation. Yeah, look, this is a silly word, but it's come out to refer to the fact that in businesses today, more and more of the IT budgets are being spent by marketers and HR people, finances, and particularly marketers. And so what's happening is IT staff have become the guys who put up the roadblocks. They've put up the no signs. We can't do what you want us to achieve. Marketers are seeing these new technologies like cloud and big data and so forth and saying, we want to take our business forward, and you're not really letting us take our business forward, so we're going to go around you. And they basically are learning with these new cloud techniques to bypass the IT departments. And this is an issue, yeah.
Yeah, I find this is talked a lot about in growth hacker literature, where it used to be the management had one set of information, the marketing team had another set of information, and then the technologists had the skills to implement. Now it's kind of reaching a point where the marketer knows basic information such as the margin and the profit, and they also have access to technology tools that can somehow let them bypass the IT developer.
Absolutely.
And what's the challenge? Why is it? I mean, like, I see lots of benefits here, but what's the bad thing?
So one of the risks when you bypass the people who are the kind of the professionals in this area, you end up with isolated applications, or if you like, crap locations that are basically designed to work on their own without any kind of interface with other applications. IT people know how to make things integrate well together, whereas the marketers tend to be thinking about just the application that's in front of them. So later on, when they open another application, it's siloed and separate. And so what we need is for these IT people and the marketers to talk together and overcome the frustrations where there are roadblocks, and get the marketers what they need and quickly. Because the new technologies allow them to get the things quickly. They shouldn't be held up by the IT people.
Which is why we're having this conversation today about conversations, about language. So there's a benefit here for the marketers and the CEOs that they can jump ahead. The IT people don't like it because it often doesn't factor in everything else that's going on, and they probably also are a little bit threatened by the idea as well too, which then they end up sounding like the bad guy.
Absolutely.
Now, the action for listeners today on this topic of disintermediation.
Yep.
Which what did you call it? You called it cutting out the middleman when we were talking a little bit earlier.
That's basically what the word means, isn't it?
Yeah. That's what today's about. Simplifying complex words.
Silly word.
Silly words. The action for today, and I think that Alan posed it before, is if you identify what your end goals are, when you're talking to your technologist, it makes the conversation so much easier, doesn't it? When you say, this is what I want to achieve.
Yeah. I would also say, don't accept no for an answer. I think that's the key thing here.
Right.
Yep, don't accept no for an answer.
So this is when you're talking to a technologist, you say, I want to do this, and they say, no, it can't be done, or
Exactly.
no, it's not going to work.
Well, with the whole cloud model, the whole idea is that most things can be done. You just got to find a way to do it. And the IT people need to get that into their head and learn that they need to now become empowering and not restricting. That's the message, the action plan for them.
Well, yeah, that's great. So we've got two action plans. One for the busy business owner, or the marketing director, someone who's involved in speaking to the technologist, to be very clear on what your goals are, based on what's the outcome that you want, the commercial outcome. And for the technologist, it's maybe just erasing that word no and replacing it with the word at least maybe.
Absolutely. At least let's have a conversation about it.
At least let's have a conversation about it. At least maybe. Now, another thing that we couldn't have this discussion about language in the technology space if we didn't tackle the topic of security and the cloud. Now, I get studies sent to me in my inbox from all sorts of people, all sorts of industries all the time that have run surveys, and pretty much across the board, about 50% of business owners in the year 2014, which is where we are right now, are still terrified of anything associated with the cloud. What's going on here?
Yeah, I think if you go back to the 1980s, the business leaders back then, the 60-year-olds and so forth, were not feeling happy or secure unless they had a piece of paper in their hand, right? And then we basically have moved along from there to the point where we want to see the server. But now we've kind of got to reach the point where we realise that people who are professionals in this are much better at securing our stuff than we are ourselves. At the end of the day, one of the most overlooked aspects of security is the physical security, and most locations are nowhere near as secure as the professionals who are handling this.
Well, let's come back to that and bring this back, right for the Luddites, for the technophobes out there that sometimes are even struggling with this expression, the cloud. Now, this is your business. This is your industry. Rackspace is, you could probably rattle off statistics for half an hour about what a significant global enterprise it is. But at the end of the day, it's about storing people's data, which is their websites and their documents and their materials.
Precious to them, yes. Anything
that's precious to them. Where's it going?
So we have a number of data centers around the world. We have them here in Australia, we have them in Hong Kong, we have them in London, we have them in America and various places. These facilities are top-notch things with very, very high physical security. I once recently went to one of our data centers here in Australia, and I was stopped at the gate, which is a good arm's throw from the door. It was raining, and I said, "Look, I'm here to see somebody," and they said, "No, you're not. You're not on our list." And I said, "Yeah, actually, I was supposed to come 24 hours ago," and they said, "Yes, we can see that, but you're not on our list for today, so you can't come in." And then they had to go and find someone, but they wouldn't let me in the gate in the rain until they had gone. Now, at the time, I was a bit cranky, but once I'd got over that initial thing, yes, it's absolutely right, and I was pleased that they were like that with me. So the physical security is far, far better than most companies can do on their own.
Well, for me, my big turning point for me was that I was riding a ferry across the beautiful Sydney Harbour, playing around on my laptop, and someone nudged me, and you know where that laptop went? It went in the drink.
No.
Yeah. And for me, wouldn't it have been wonderful if everything on that laptop had been stored, well, firstly, it had been backed up somewhere, and then secondly, if I'd been using all sorts of different cloud applications to store my email and my documents somewhere else.
Yeah, I had a personal contact who ran a small financial advisory business, and his computer died on him, and I saw it sitting right inside his front door out next to a window, and I said, "Have you got this backed up anywhere?" And he said, "No." I said, "Not even in the cloud?" He said, "I wouldn't put things in the cloud, it's not secure." Now, anyone could have smashed the glass and taken the computer, and his whole business was gone. So I was able to recover his data for him, but yeah, people are not thinking about this quite the right way.
It happened to my dad recently, and it almost happened to me here. It's pretty prescient that we're talking, not prescient, I can't think of the word, but pertinent to now, because my information, so I arrived at the office this morning and someone had moved all my laptop and everything because there'd been a leak in the roof.
Yeah.
And that real situation happened to my dad. There was a leak in the roof, and of course it just happened to be directly above his laptop, and he lost 5 years of emails because it was all sitting on Outlook on his laptop, and it wasn't backed up anywhere. So
just on that quickly, if I can say, when I was the CIO at my previous job at Altium, we found that we had 96% of our emails were sitting in people's local folders. We had 14 mail servers around the world, and when we finally moved them all into the cloud, that problem just went away. Everything became secure. Yeah.
So the action is, it's just ask yourself, is your data secure? Is your data secure? And we're not just talking about, hey, you should get your website and some other important stuff onto a place like Rackspace. We're talking about things like, if you're using email, is it being backed somewhere else? Or
for the small business, I would say to them, get one of your mates who you trust very well to come and basically do a simple audit of your facilities. Can they break in? Can they get into facilities? Is your Wi-Fi secure, for example? Things like that. Just get them to think about things that you're not thinking about. That would be a good action plan, I think, for the smaller business.
Yeah. So is it secure? If there was a flood or if someone robbed you, how bad would that be? And if it was bad, just, Google it and find out what you should be doing to protect it.
Here's a great action plan. Make a test of your backup if you have one, and check that you can actually restore the data. Some people think they're getting backups and they're actually got nothing there. So make sure you test your backup. That's a good action plan.
Yeah, that's a fantastic one. And please do it, listeners at home, because a lot of people don't do these things because they're a little bit frightened or a little bit scary, or they'll worry about that later, and then the time comes and it's too late. Now, for our third theme, the evolution of agility. Now, agility is another one of these words. So we've dealt with a really mouthful, disintermediation. Then we've moved on to security and the cloud. Now we're talking about the evolution of agility. Now, when I hear the word agility, the first thing that jumps to my mind is the speed of a website.
Yep.
But that's only part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, look, agility is about being able to have the freedom to do what you want to achieve without having to worry about your infrastructure. So agility can mean being responsive to the needs of the marketplace. Agility can mean being able to set up a site that you have no idea whether it's going to have 1,000 hits an hour or 200 million hits an hour, but being able to have the website respond to that spike or that need. And being able to also take marketing opportunities that are presented to you that you may not have thought of. If all of a sudden, let's say your business is focused on one country, and all of a sudden you get somebody who you met from somewhere in a completely different part of the world loves your model, and you want to be able to modify your software to cope with the legislation in that country really quickly. That's part of agility as well.
Yeah, right. So yes, adapting to change. Breaking it down to the simple side of things. The first thing that I mentioned before was the speed of the speed of the site. As an action point, you can actually go onto sites like, I think there's Google Insights, and just tap in your URL and it tells you whether your website is fast or not. Speed of the website is something that Google looks at as well too when they're deciding whether to rank your website high or low when people are searching for you. Webmaster Tools is something else that you can look at. But the other thing that you mentioned there was automatics. Is able to scale up, and we're talking about automatically scaling.
Absolutely, yes. So you want to be able to have a website that can respond automatically to a change in needs. So let's say, for example, your business is a florist or you're a sports statistics thing, and once every 4 years, every man and his dog wants to know something about weightlifting or whatever.
Yeah.
So
the Olympics or something like that.
Exactly,
once every 4 years. Or when it's for the florist, it becomes Mother's Day or Valentine's Day.
Exactly. So you want to be able to basically respond to those demands automatically by the hour even, so that during the middle of the night, you're not necessarily having your website, you're not paying for it. So you can pay by the hour with these things, with automatic scaling up and automatically scaling down.
So we're talking about like a hosting solution here, and what normally happens is someone buys a certain package, and that's how much, I guess, grunt power that your host is going to provide to you when people are visiting your website. But I know our big lesson for us many years ago was we was early days of Twitter, and Guy Kawasaki tweeted one of our articles, and our traffic didn't go up by 10% or 100%. It went up something like 20,000%, and our site could not cope with that. The hosting product the particular package that we had could not cope with that, and our website crashed.
Yeah.
And then it crashed again once it was up, and then it crashed again, and for about a week it kept crashing as the traffic came through. So we're talking about automatic scale is a different type of product.
Absolutely right. Well, it's part of what the cloud brings, and the hybrid cloud, which enables you to have a baseline that's predictable, and you don't pay as much for that because you've got a contractual prediction. But then you'd be able to, so we say, own the base and rent the spike. So you can basically burst into the public cloud for when you need that extra. It's like if you're driving a car every day, you don't want to use a taxi because it's going to cost you a lot of money. But if you're going to a different city and you just need a car for a few hours or whatever, then you use a taxi or a hire car.
I just like the what is it? Own the
Yeah, rent the base. Own the base, rent the spike.
Own the base, rent the spike. That's a very easy way to think about automatic scaling of a website. Because when we talk about the evolution of agility, most people are talking about the agility. They're looking at their websites and they're saying, why is my website so slow? Or why is it hard to load? Is that a hosting issue? Speed of site can come down to a bunch of different factors: the images that you have, the way that your website is structured. So the action there is to go look for something like Google Insights or look for Webmaster Tools, and they'll give you a whole bunch of different suggestions. The other option is that your hosting provider is not giving you the grunt force that you need when there's a big lift in activity.
Another good tip for people I would add there is if you do have a lot of images and so forth on your site, ask your provider if they have a CDN service, as Content Delivery Network, which basically means that your images are distributed to the periphery around the world, and they come from local area, not from your central hub, and that will speed them up a lot and cost you a lot less money too.
Yeah, right. Okay, cool. So this is simplifying language. So if our action here is it would really be just ask your provider about whether they do provide automatic scaling.
Yes.
Because you're not going to need it until the moment where you really, really want it. What was the example we were talking about a little bit earlier when there was the major retailers of Australia joined forces to launch something called Click Frenzy?
That's right, Click Frenzy, yeah. So their website went down in a matter of seconds.
18 seconds, something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact thing, but it's something like that. And they basically didn't have this, because in a traditional approach, you've got to go and invest heavily in your baseline infrastructure, and if you have no idea what the end use case is going to be, then you don't want to take too much of a risk, do you? But with this bursting ability, you can basically put your baseline, what you expect, and then burst for any additional that you need from the cloud, and that'll help you cope.
Because you don't know you're going to need it until you need it.
Yeah, and if you can rent it by the hour and shut it down very quickly, then you can afford for a few hours to go over the top just in case.
And it's worthwhile because the traffic's there and that's what you want. Moving on to our fourth theme. Now, best practice for developers. Now, this is one that always seemed to do my head in. Whenever I spoke to my developers, some of them would just say, oh yeah, all we really need to do is back it up at night, and other ones were saying, oh yeah, well, I'd like to have it on the hosting platform, and let's also put it on my personal computer. All sorts of ones had different ideas and about best practice for just making changes, keeping it consistent and secure while you're making development changes to something like a website. What are just some of the basics of best practice?
The basics, let's start with, you've got to have version control.
Version control.
Yeah, which enables you to basically roll back any changes that you put into the system and go back to an earlier version and look at any of your versions as they stood at any point in time. It's kind of like having a time machine.
Yeah.
So that's a really good basic one. Another one is being able to build, for the cloud world, you want to be able to build for scale and build for fault tolerance. Have you heard of what Netflix did with their Chaos Monkeys program?
No, but I like the idea of Chaos Monkeys.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea where they actually deliberately had a team whose job was to sabotage the production environment. They would cause hard drives to fail and cables to fail and whole computer servers to fail. So the programmers who are writing the actual Netflix application had to design for fault and failure because they had other people working inside the company who were deliberately causing failure.
Those Chaos Monkeys!
Yeah, and so now they've open sourced Chaos Monkeys so that other people can also have sabotage inside their systems.
Wow.
Yeah, so it really, really makes you put your money where your mouth is when you want to design for fault tolerance.
So I'm going to break it down into some really simple principles for anyone out there that has a website. We talked about version control,
Yeah.
and I loved what you said about it's able to roll things back or have a time machine or go back in time machine.
Yep.
So the way that I gather is that you have three different developer environments or three environments. One is the production site, which is the live site.
Yep.
Then there's the staging site, which is for testing.
Yes.
And then there's the developer site, which as the business owner or marketer, you might never ever see because that's what the developer is using to mess around with.
Absolutely. And the way that the world is heading in terms of this and the agility and so forth is the developer can script an entire environment which will have firewalls and load balancers and computer servers, all with pre-installed software on them, so that within a matter of a couple of minutes, he's got the entire environment that replicates and mimics, maybe in a smaller scale, but mimics the production environment, so that he knows exactly how this work he's going to do is going to work in the production environment.
So in my world, and anyone who's got a website, it usually works out to be, I've got a production site, everyone can see it. I've got a staging site where the developer sends me to check out what he or she has done, and then they've got their dev site, which is what they're working on, sometimes just hosted on their own laptop.
Exactly right.
Whatever it is to do what they're going to do.
Exactly right.
And the way to manage this, which is called version control, there's a series of different tools, and the most popular I think is called GitHub.
Yeah, GitHub is GitHub is a social media based means of having this version control. There are a number of other version control products too, but it's definitely at the moment, I think the flavour of the month. It's definitely a really good product, and some very, very large products like OpenStack are being developed and hosted inside GitHub.
Yeah. And the reason why I mention it is that I know we're talking about language, and when I talk to my developers, they'll often use expressions like, oh, we need to commit it.
Yep.
We need to commit something from the staging site to the prod site.
Yes.
And I go, what does that mean? And it basically means that they're just bringing it from one environment to the next environment. And it also means that if then things go wrong, they can press the button, roll back, and that time machine can get put into play.
There's two aspects there. Committing it to the version control, and then deploying it to the production environment. So
great.
And the deployment is done often these days in an automated way. There's a thing called Jenkins. If anyone's interested, they should look up Jenkins. It's like having an automatic build factory, and it just again takes out the human errors from screwing up a release.
So this is the sorts of language that your developers will be using, so that you can talk the same language without feeling overwhelmed. Your action for this particular component is having a look at whether or not your particular online environment is using this sort of process. Because the alternative to this is that your website goes down, or someone installs something, or it catches a cold. You can't roll back time, right?
Yeah, look, the most basic one I would say is make sure every piece of code you have is version controlled.
Is version controlled, right. So there's just a question for your developer or your crew. How can we roll out version control if we're not already? Which will save you later down the track. Now, to finish up for our fifth theme, we've got a big topic, and it is, of course, big data. It's two words on the tip of everyone's tongue that's in the technology space. What are we talking about here, and how do we bring this back to something that's meaningful for business owners?
I think the most important thing to mention about big data is that it doesn't have to be huge workloads. It can be small amounts of data, but that are just difficult to process using any other technique. So it can be a relatively big data in terms of your business, okay?
It's bigger than what your brain can do.
Yeah, bigger than what your brain can do, or bigger than what your computing budget will allow you to do using traditional approaches.
Right.
Because the whole idea of big data is to use more of a cattle rather than pets approach to servers. You're familiar with this pets versus cattle analogy?
No, I am not.
Yeah, so
here we go from, what is it, monkeys to cattle.
So pets are our traditional way we have servers. We look after them very carefully. We stroke them and make sure they're happy, right? And if something goes wrong with them, we work intensively hard to bring them back to life. Cattle, livestock, and if something goes wrong with the server, you just shut it down and get another one. And that's the whole cloud model. It's the whole way that big data works, to scale out to many computers rather than scaling up to bigger computers. The world is growing with heaps and heaps of amounts of data. We've gone from people doing the data entry for us to having our own data entry in the Web 2.0, and now the biggest capture of data is the idea of the machine-to-machine thing, the Internet of Things. And Gartner says 26 billion interconnected devices by 2020, and something between 100 billion and 5 trillion sensors, depending upon who you ask. They're even putting sensors on the back of bees to track the swarm thing. So I think
I remember when Moore's law was terrifying.
Yeah, well, Moore's law, which talks about the doubling of our computer capacity every 12 to 18 months. The thing is that the data has outstripped Moore's law. And so for a little while there, we couldn't process the amount of data we had. Now we've come up with new techniques that allow us to process much, much, much bigger amounts of data with smaller machines. So it's really enabling businesses to get a better understanding of their customer, improve their efficiency, their logistics, reduce the customer's churn and propensity to churn and things of that nature. So yeah, it's a very exciting area.
Well, let's just talk about customers for a moment, because that's an area that a lot of people are very much interested in if you're running a business. In my organisation, we always talk about small data as well as big data, because big data is collecting all this information, but at the end of the day, we want a very personal experience for the person who's using our site.
Yeah. One story that really stood out for me was a story of a man who went and stayed in the hotel, and on checkout they had a real drive to improve, and that the staff were getting incentivized for getting feedback from the customers. So they asked him at checkout, was there anything we could have done better? And he said, no, everything was good. He said, anything at all, because I'd really, really like to know. And he said, well, if I must say, if I'm looking for something, your shampoo was a bit harsh for me. He said, oh, what do you use? And he said, I use baby shampoo. 7 or 8 months later, he stayed in another hotel in the world, somewhere else, in the same chain, walked into his hotel room, and there's a bottle of baby shampoo in his hotel.
Yeah, so that's the personalization of the experience. Yeah. So the action that I would say for anyone listening is thinking about the core, let me say, the common threads of information that you want to know about your customers. So I know that in the world of my businesses, what we try and do is we try and find themes such as where in the world that they live, where in the evolution of a business development that they are, whether they're a startup or a senior person, and probably about 5 other triggers. And all we think about is collecting those 5 items of information, because those 5 items of information can allow us to dramatically personalize the experience.
Yep.
From things like the emails that they get to the focus of the courses when they hit the website.
Yeah. I would say, action items here, you want to basically start storing everything. And new techniques like MongoDB and so forth through Object Rocket and whatnot are really great ways where customers or businesses can not have to worry about any of the infrastructure, but they can just start storing everything for later use. You may not have a business case for the data today, but if you don't start storing the data, then you'll never start asking the questions.
Well, that's an action that I'm going to take, because I haven't done that. But one thing that I know that we do, which can be your other action if this sounds is too hard, is write down the 3 to 5 items of information that you think would be really helpful to know about your customers.
Oh, that's a great action item. Yep.
Oh, we're in agreement.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, I think we have been throughout the entire conversation, which is great because we've been talking about communication. We've been talking about the complexities of dealing with computing and talking with our developers and other people that have a deeper insight. So to recap the themes today, firstly we talked about disintermediation, which is a fancy way of saying cutting out the middleman, cutting out the IT guys, because there's a trend, particularly of followers of growth hacker philosophies, just to jump out there and do the things that used to be things that only technologists could do. Now, there's benefits to that. Things get done faster, but the downside, of course, is that sometimes these things are done in silos without the bigger picture, without the recognizing the needs of the larger organization. So to prevent that from happening, the simple action, therefore, is to present the outcomes that you want from the technologist whenever you want to present something to them, present an idea, a task or a job or a project. And if you come from the technology side of the equation, make sure that you're not always saying no, because this is the reason why you're being leapfrogged. This is the reason why you're being cut out of the equation. Say maybe and have a think about how to achieve the outcome that the manager or the marketing director wants achieved. We then moved on to security and the idea of the cloud. And we talked about the benefits of the cloud and how security that's not on your laptop, that's not on your server, that's not in your office is often better than what you have, despite the prejudices or the preconceptions that we hold. So if that's you, if you're clinging onto the idea of that your laptop or your data is safer in your hand than elsewhere, perhaps just do a mini risk analysis. Third, we moved on to the evolution of agility. We talked about site speed and we talked about automatic scale. Now, if site speed is something that concerns you, just Google it. Google speed of my site. There are plenty of tools out there that will measure the speed of your site in comparison to your competitors, and they'll give you recommendations. Google has its own tool called Google Insights, and as well, if you want some recommendations, check out Google Webmaster Tools. When we're talking about scaling up, don't leave it to the last minute. Own the platform and rent the spike. Ask your provider, will it scale up? We then moved on to best practice for developers, and we talked about something called version control, having a production site, having a staging site, having a dev site, and then finally we moved on to big data and tried to break it down into simple ways. And we came up with 2 ways of looking at that. One was as simple as writing down 3 to 5 points of data that you think that you should be able to capture, and also storing everything for the future when technology can catch up with you, and you can start to milk that data that you don't even know is useful quite yet. But at the end of the day, it's about remembering that we're talking human to human here. The technologists that you deal with may be left-brain people. They may focus on using jargon and focusing on complex issues, complex technology solutions that you don't understand, but at the end of the day we're all humans, so it's about finding common language, and that usually begins with outcomes. And we've been very privileged to be learning from Alan Perkins, the CTO of Rackspace, the Asia Pacific CTO of Rackspace, who's been very kind enough to bring some of these complex areas into language, turn them into language that I think that even a technophobe, closet Luddite like myself can understand. So thank you very much, Alan.
No worries, you're very welcome.